everyone. Good time zone, as we are all seemingly sharing all of our time zones, which is awesome to see where everyone is from. Oh, yay, good. I was trying to hold out until my heat turned off because it's so loud and turned on literally as I was putting my finger over the button to start things. So hello everyone, I'm going to wear my glasses today so I can read all the tiny little text for all of the comments and I can answer things for you. So, I haven't done a live in about a year, so I thought it was time. It seemed the appropriate season, I guess. And I figured I would talk about some of the shoes that I have acquired over the last year and answer questions about these, or I have like pretty much all of my shoes next to me as well, so I can answer questions about different time periods, different construction techniques, all sorts of different things. So, Bailey is behaving today. You can see the fluff right there. This is her spot most of the day, so hopefully she should be okay with that. And yeah, so I'll talk about shoemaking if you guys have questions for me or anything. I am going to kind of run through a whole bunch of stuff and chat, but I am glad to answer questions as we go about anything I'm talking about or just in general as well. So I don't have like a preset have to get through type thing. So, where am I from? That is a complicated question. I've moved around a lot. So I currently live in Reno, Nevada, but I've only lived here for a few years. This is not my normal abode area. I've lived all over the Midwest and East Coast, essentially. So, yes. Yeah, Bailey is very well settled into her very comfy pillow spot. So, no worries about her. But, here, I'll get started. I'll pull up shoes and we can chat about different things. What pair? I'll just grab what pair is on the furthest left. I tried to set up with, if I wear a skirt, and it's not too weirdly colored. Alright, first pair. I guess I'm not really showing you pairs. I have too many shoes to bring down a full pair of everything. I just brought down one on each, a book on shoe. I would love to do a book on shoes at some point, but I feel like I need to do way more than one. Or a very large one. Too many things with shoes. So this is one of my most recent ones. I actually have another pair of antique shoes literally in the mail. It's supposed to arrive today. It'd be hilarious if it arrives while we're talking, but if I jump up and run to the door, you'll know why. But we should be here for about at least a couple hours. If you wanted to make some super curvy Edwardian heels, pointy cowboy boot, it might be. Cowboy boot lasts are pretty similar in lots of ways. They're definitely a bit of a more antiquated style, so if you want to start making shoes, I definitely recommend starting with a lot of the modern instructions, just because it's simpler, but it's a lot of the same stuff, just without the complicated stitching. I definitely recommend starting with the less complex stuff. The stitching is the more complex. And so you learn patterning and all that stuff. So this pair of beauties, I'm pretty sure is from probably the late 1880s. You can see the heel is very low here, so this is the heel that we start to really see come in the late 1880s and continue well into the 1890s. The difference between, say, the 1890s and this 1880s is the fact that this is pretty round toe. It's not super pointed yet. Most of my antique shoes I get off of Etsy or from antique dealers. A lot of things come from Witchy Vintage. She has a lot of beautiful stuff, more shoes than I can possibly buy. So most of the ones that I'm showing you today come from her. Or occasionally, like I said, Etsy, eBay finds things like that. So this one I just thought was particularly great because you don't normally see really beautiful velvet shoes like this as commonly. I'm pretty sure this is essentially a house shoe. You can actually see inside it has a quilted insole liner, which is another hint that it's really not meant for heavy outdoor use. It does have a leather sole, so it's not meant entirely, like it's not like an indoor slipper somebody personally made or whatever. It's still very much a shoe. It's just a comfy, very warm shoe. Still has leather for lining and still has all the structure in it, so this isn't exactly super soft. The toe doesn't have any structure in it, but it doesn't really need it. But there is the heel cup back here that you can kind of see where it ends about there. So this is, I have a love affair with Oxfords in general, so I'm always a big sucker for Oxfords, but the fact that it's just such beautiful colors and such an unusual fabric is great. So I haven't had a chance to really explore this one or a few of the other ones that I'll show today that much because these just came in last week. Witchy Vintage got a huge haul of different shoes, and I just was like, all right, how many things can I purchase at once? They might be the original laces. They do have the metal tip there, and there's nothing to denote the fact that they wouldn't be necessarily. Like, it wouldn't make sense that these have had that replaced, but I mean, it's not a very exciting pair of laces, but if this is meant to be just a nice pair. The other thing is, like, there's not a ton of wear and tear on the bottom. Like, this could definitely be just from walking. This is essentially equivalent to my house slippers, where I go outside occasionally. But it is probably a turn shoe. It might be glued together. Looking at how tight it is, I think it might be cemented together. There's plenty that went outside with the mud, at least at one point. But what era time period has the most comfortable shoes? That's really hard to say. I am most comfortable in a little bit of a heel, usually a little more than this one, but some people prefer really flat styles. Flat eras, of course, are early 19th century and very like 1890s sort of range. I'm comfortable with a little bit more of a heel. I haven't made all of the different 19th century eras yet to actually get to try them out, so it's just a matter of what works for you. I tend to like things that actually do, like Oxfords and boots and stuff like that, rather than open shoes, just because of the shape of my feet. So what defines this as an Oxford is the lacing on top of the foot here. The fact that it's not a boot, doesn't go up above, you know, that level, but it does lace up over the foot. And there are different variations on this. It develops in the early 19th century as a men's style, and women pick it up pretty quickly as well. So you find Oxfords commonly, honestly, from like 1830s forward for everyone. So yeah. Let's see, anything interesting other than that? It does have its size on it, which, remember, the sizes are not the same as they currently are. I don't know if I can get it to show, but it's right there, little stamp on it, which says 3.5. So this would be most likely, technically, it should be equivalent to about I think probably 5.5 modern women's for US. It would be about 3.5 for UK. But I feel like that's honestly a little, this is before sizes get fully regulated. This is about the time that they're really talking about it. So honestly, looking at the shoe, it doesn't feel quite that small. It feels more like a 6, but not like dramatically off. So somewhere in that range. But yeah, it's got nothing particularly unusual in its construction from what I've seen. I just really like the quilted insole more than anything, and the fabric uppers. So, yeah, the shoes, I guess I should say pretty much shoes are comfortable up until we start getting into the 1920s and 30s, when they start getting cheaply made, and by the time we reach the 1950s, comfort goes out the window. So, yeah, everything in this will be available later, so if you come in late, don't worry about it. The biggest disaster I've experienced with making shoes, I patterned a pair of boots wrong and couldn't get them off of the last, so I had to destroy, and I realized that pretty early on in the process, and so I had to essentially destroy the shoe, and didn't finish making the second one, and I've never gone back to finish it. I have a video about that from about a year ago that was like, oops, I messed up sort of thing. I do have an 18th century shoe, I can show that. I've done an entire video on that one way back, but I will gladly show that one in just a little bit. But that one I want to start with. Another one that I didn't make it into my previous video, but I've had for a little bit longer, but I just wanted to show you the toe on this lovely lady, because it's just so pretty. So this is a little bit earlier. You can see it still has a little bit of a squarish toe to it. Oh, there we go. A little bit of a squarish toe to it. It's not super square though. So we're looking at that transitional period, late 70s, early 80s, where we're moving from square to rounded. And this embroidery is just lovely. The fill is little pieces of velvet, so it's essentially kind of appliqué down, and then finished off with chain stitching. See how close this lens will take it. This is a new lens, so I'm still seeing what the extent of its manage capabilities are. That's pretty close, so yeah. It's just really pretty, and I think it was a much brighter pink underneath at one point. Nothing else particularly spectacular about the shoes. They're not in perfect condition by any means. You can actually see that the heel cap has come off of this one. I think the FF is on both of them. I think it's specific to the maker and all of that, but I haven't been able to figure out anything particular about it. But what is interesting is that it is still straight last, which is unusual for this late, and actually points me to the fact that I think this might be a European shoe rather than American, because American shoes really started pushing that right-left, as did the UK, much earlier. So I think this might be a European example. And this is going to sound weird because I don't have stuff to back it up yet, but the FF on this, the stamp, the particular font of this stamp and the way that it's used is really common in French shoes. I haven't had a chance to look at other European shoes as much. I've read a lot of French. I've looked at a lot of French shoes. I've looked at a lot of UK and American shoes. But this sort of stamping is mostly common on French shoes that I've found so far. So I'm hoping to eventually get to look at German and other places as well and see if that continues over. But it's really... it's one of those things where you start to notice stuff like that, and then you can just kind of keep going and see what you can find in the process. But you know, leather covered heel, like you would expect, really shiny glazed leather. I don't really know of any good construction of historical shoe sources. I don't want to say I wrote a book because that's really not what it is. Before Coco Chanel, there was anybody but Coco Chanel. She didn't do anything. That's a video for the future. Yeah, FF might be a brand thing. That's the thing. Like, Panay put all of the stamps underneath, so it might be the brand. Or something. Yeah, for all I know, it's they didn't tend to mark things with like locations prior to that point, so I don't know. I'm guessing it's just a brand name thing. Yeah, FF is also used in the same way for music. So if you read a lot of like musical things, it's Ferris France. So yeah, I don't really, like I said, I did one, I honestly don't know where I have links that I did on like an 18th century shoe process, but at this point I think I probably have more on my channel than anywhere else. Have I seen a shoe built with someone for high arches or no arches? So the thing is, this is a good example of it. You can see how narrow this is called the waist here. You can see how narrow this is. And this is a really low heel, but there are different eras where they get super narrow. And what that means is that this isn't necessarily, if you put on modern shoes, this area here doesn't touch your arch so much, like the outside of your foot maybe, but the actual arch portion of your foot, not so much. But what happens here is because this is cut in so far, this curve here will mold and support via actually being, like, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. It's much more bridge-like, so rather than building something underneath, we're actually supporting it. So especially in cases like these Oxfords or boots, the support runs all the way to the top of the foot and is lifted by the top. So no matter what your arch is, it's supported, whether it's flatter or higher. In general, there's also a lot of discussions in the era about the types of shoes that you wear, and wearing shoes today that are over-engineered or under-engineered in terms of support means that our feet have developed differently, because the arch area and how our feet work is something, they're a bit more malleable than we like to think. They're very stretchy, and they can change a lot. So shoes, having grown up with shoes that were always gently hugging and holding you into the right position might make things develop differently. So this pair is, yes, early 90s. You can see we're not too super pointed toe at this point, but we are still in the very low heel range. So this is probably 90 to 92. But very indicative of the fad for Oxfords and boots in this era. Lots of two-tone. This is one of my favorites. I actually have this set and the box that it came in, so I actually have the shoe box for this. And it has seen better days. Interior-wise, the lining, the Wittah lining is starting to disappear from the insole and rip apart, so it's clearly on the more fragile side. But you can see where the nails go through for that reason to the heel, since it is a knock-on style heel where it's made up and then added to. So, most unusual shoe that I've seen. Ooh. I don't think I've actually seen that many that I would deem that weird, like things that I would deem weird to begin with, but then the more I look, the more normal things get. I don't know if I come up with something, but the Glasgow collection had a lot of shoes. I tried to pick out ones that I thought were representational of the era. They didn't have like a ton of weird things. I do need to go back and look at some others that they have but were on display elsewhere, including my favorite pair, which is a haunted pair of shoes. I really want to go back, spend time with those, and do a whole video on those. They store them, but they were on display currently, so I couldn't see them. But that's way up on my list. How do I preserve these shoes? So the things that I need to do in order to preserve them, which I have to actually sit down and do this at some point, the best thing I can do is either stuff them with acid-free tissue paper, or I can make little cushions that are sized appropriately to fit inside. I've done both before. I'm probably just going to, for time's sake, go through with acid-free tissue paper. A lot of them already have tissue paper in them, but I don't know if it's acid-free, so I don't want to guarantee that. And then what I should do is get a whole bunch of acid-free board, and I keep them on in little cubbies individually isolated, and I should put little acid-free things underneath each one of them. That's on my goal list. I also don't tend to buy a lot of really pristine quality shoes. I prefer to buy the ones that are already kind of too far gone. So that way I don't feel as bad about putting them through a lot of handling, a lot of research. I don't need them to be in perfect condition. I'm not displaying them as a museum. I'm using them as a research tool. So every once in a while I'll have ones that are in really good condition, but most of the time, honestly, some of them are frankly just falling apart. So my oldest shoe is my 18th century, 1780s. I'll show that in a little bit. My favorite. That's a tough one. I don't know. I mean, the 18th century one is special to me because that was actually the first one I ever bought. But, yeah. So, yeah, these are metal. So the laces on this are a metal, so it's just a little flat piece of metal that gets curled around it. I actually have an antique like little thing for crimping these down. One of them has a little tuft on the end, the other one doesn't, so I don't know what happened there. It may have gotten pulled a little bit and then they just closed it up. So, and yeah, honestly, my 18th century shoe is in a shoebox, but it's just wrapped in acid-free tissue paper and then put into a box. That is perfectly fine. The biggest recommendation I can say is just get acid-free tissue paper. You could even get that from like the Container Store sometimes. Places like that. There's a whole bunch of places. So yeah, that's my favorite towel. It just depends on what I'm into at the moment. Like so many of these I really love on so many levels. I do really love my World's Fair boots. They are not from my favorite exposition, but I've showed those before. I'll bring it back up at some point probably. But I have a thing for the 1851 grade exhibition, and that's the closest I've gotten. How do you tell if it's labeled as acid-free? It is specifically, like, sold as that. Otherwise, you assume it is not. So, if I could do a collaboration with anyone in the historical dress community, man, I mean, I can. That's the problem. That's the problem is at this point, I'm like, I have too many ideas and options. We always talk about lots of things when we all get together, and I have so many ideas, but it's timing things out with people is really difficult. I've got a couple people that I'm working with currently, and just, it's holidays especially, back and forth is difficult. Have I added any tools? Yes, but I think I've shown them all in the most recent videos, so nothing else particularly spectacular. But yeah, regular paper, like when it, you'll pull it out and it's all yellowed, that's very much not acid-free. You can get things from Michael's. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like because of photographs and stuff like that, they also need to be stored acid-free. So, is there a specific end date for shank buttons? Nope. Shank buttons continue, like, great example, I have Oh, man, that one doesn't have shank buttons. But, you know, they continue basically as long as you have any buttons on shoes. You'll still find them today. Like, literally, the little rounded shank buttons are still being produced for shoes. So, I am considering shoe last, and I'm actually going to show you in a minute something that might be more likely to end up being shoe last, because it's really similar, because I managed to get my hands on something I can date specifically. Most of my Marie creations are based off of shoes in my collection or in other people's collections, museums, or drawings, things like that. Occasionally I'll be a little creative about it, but yeah. I really want to, I mean, a shoe last on my own foot wouldn't be really useful. You don't want to make a shoe that looks like your foot. That'd be awkward and probably not fit well. But yeah, I do want to get into doing lasts. I know Vicky does some really beautiful ones, and the place that I've worked with before is the same one that she works with. I just would like to reproduce them in wood for a long list of reasons. And I've done similar things. It just takes setting up with them and making sure that we're all on the same page and getting a range of things going. So it's a definite thing I am considering. It's just something I want to be like, I am happy with my options before I send things off to do that, and then have things not fit people, because what fits me may not fit everyone else. But yeah, so great example, wool braid for the very lightweight shoelaces. They are usually silk or wool. I think this one might actually be wool, because it's a little softer than silk usually is. But yeah, so pretty example. Like I said, my favorite part about this is the fact that I have a box with it. I mean, they're beautiful shoes, but all of that. Were shoes ever spiral laced? Yes. Let me check mine really fast, see if any of these are. Not that one. Nope. All three of my side lacing boots are not, but it is not uncommon for them to be. For side lacing boots like this, to have that. So, yeah. The squishiness of feet, the fact that when you're measuring, you squish it or not. Like, no different than when you're measuring the body. Some things squish, some things don't. So, I'm sure acid-free paper and cardboard in Europe, I guarantee they have some around for art-based things. Just look for, like, paper. Most of the places I get it from around here are also things that are for preservation of, like, photographs or paper goods or things like that. So archival safe, yes. That's another good word for it. What do they do to correct flat-footedness? They talk about it kind of as like a developing issue, but basically just saying like it comes from not having properly fitted shoes. Is their theory. That's not accurate necessarily. But it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue then as it is now, which is another reason why I will still stand by the idea that it is very related to how you wore shoes or what shoes you wore growing up, that sort of thing, and how loose, because your feet are much like your hands. The bones are not like actually connected by anything other than these tendons, and so how much you stretch things, you can pull them back in. But if you grow up wearing very fitted shoes that kind of keep things well together, then it won't have as much of a likelihood for that falling out. So they don't really have a way to fix it. It's just that there are, like I said, shoes are much more moldable and adaptable historically than they are now. So, yes. So these are, you can see one of the key factors here is that they are right and left, and that little decorative stuff that is just barely visible on the sole kind of really pins it to 1850s, probably early 1850s, maybe late 40s, but early 1850s. The toe here is pretty rounded, which for a long time I would have looked at a toe like this and thought, oh, okay, we're looking at like 1870s here, but it definitely seems to be a trend for right around that era to have that shape. So I'm still working out exactly what shapes happen in what years. That's one of the reasons why I've been gradually collecting more and more from this era, even though they're pretty similar with all of that. I don't think I've done one specific to my tools. I have so many. I mean, I could do that at some point. But Yeah, the last is essentially a mold, a shape that you're working over, which is what gives it the final form. I'll show you some examples in a little bit. But how do I keep... Yeah, my hands are pretty, I don't want to say beat up at this point, they're just really strong. They go back and forth between being beat up. Basically, I've learned not to go from shoemaking into embroidery. That's the best way to think about it. Reference book for styles of shoes throughout the 19th century. I honestly don't have, the only book that I really recommend overall that's easy to get a hold of, I think Shoes of America, but I don't think it goes that far into the 19th century. But that's the only one that I found that goes beyond a pretty picture book. Like, eh. So there are some lovely books that are pretty picture books, but at that point you're just as best off like doing a Pinterest board. So, yep. Yeah, shoe lasts are really hard to date, especially when they're flat lasted like this. Like I said, one of the key things that you can do for dating is right, left, and does it have a heel, or should it have a heel, and that makes a huge difference. Yeah, I've showed my tools in a few things, but I don't think I've done a big one. I don't have a P.O. box or anything like that, so I generally don't take shoes or other things that people send me just because I have so many things. Like, I'm glad to take a look at them and give you some advice on, like, pictures and things like that. I'd love to getting pictures of them, but most of the time, and I'm never going to say exactly no because they might be unusual, but usually I only purchase or accept shoes where I look at them and go, I have more questions than answers and need them in my hands to figure them out. So, that's the way that I always put it. Oh, Chamomire. I can never say, I'm going to say Chamomire. Chamomire, yeah, I love that brand. That is a really popular brand. That is, I've seen so many shoes from them over the years. But anyway, this is a great example of side lacing boots, which are going out, the flat style, which is going out, the right-left that's coming in, the decorative styles of the 1850, and I really love the fact that the tongue underneath here, it'll be really hard to see probably, but it's actually a slightly different fabric. It's a heavier rib without the little flowers in the shoe as the sun comes out and really brightens everything up a lot for a moment. They are lined in a linen. Pull that back except for the tongue, which is lined in a cotton. Again, I haven't really spent much time with this pair because it's brand new to me. And they are very similar to this pair that I have. It's just kind of like essentially very much the same time period, very similar shape. They're different sizes. This one is a fair bit smaller, and you can just sort of see that the finish is very different on them. Like this one has a lot more fancy decorative stuff. This one's pretty plain and practical and quickly done, etc., etc. And so it's just a great example of shoes that are definitely from the same time period, but high quality versus more everyday, middling quality or something of the sort. So I picked I got this one because I was like, I feel like this is a good example of when we talk about expensive versus less expensive shoes, where you can start to see little differences in terms of the quality and that sort of thing. A lot of it just depends where you can send antique shoes is really going to depend on where you are and what the story is about the shoe, and if you're just looking to sell it or to get it to a museum. If you actually know whose shoes they were, and you're local and the person that had them was local, a lot of times you can get, local museums might be interested in them, house museums, things like that. But if you just happen to have them and whatever, sometimes it's better to just, send them on to someone else who would like to purchase them. Are these laces original? I don't know on this one. I don't think so because it just looks like a knotted cord that was done later, so I'm guessing that this was just added to hold them together later, so I would not assume that they're original. But yeah, if I could own any pair of historical shoes. I don't know. Most of it's just like things that I want to spend time on, which is earlier stuff, just because it's hard to find anything super early. But it depends on whether they are actually leather or not is part of the problem. They're actual leather, but if it's like a patent leather versus chrome tanned versus veg tanned, that sort of thing. Look into companies that do stuff for books, leather books and things like that. That's where I get a lot of my leather hydration stuff from. So, the cursed shoes. So this pair of boots is a great example of a side lacing pair of boots that is from probably late 1830s, early 1840s. You can see that super square toe. Look at that. Like it almost looks flared out. Like it looks like it should. It's a very weird shape. It's very straight on the bottom, but because of the way that the top and the last is shaped, it almost looks flared. So they're not actually flared most of the time. Some are, from what I can tell. I haven't gotten my hands on the ones that look really super flared, but you can also see the stitching starting to wear down and show, because the channel that they stitched into was done vertically for this pair versus horizontally or in a hidden way, so you can actually see the stitches showing the whole way around, which is really cool. Like I said, I'll be glad to take a look at them, but I can't guarantee, just because I don't necessarily need examples of all types. I have very limited space. That's always the problem. It's more limited space. So, and even the things that I do take, a lot of these will eventually probably get passed on. But this is a great example of, again, straight last, right left hasn't started. That's more 1840s when they really start talking about it, and 1850s, 60s when it really starts happening. Commonly, I like the fact that you can actually see, it might be kind of hard to tell, but it's not even flat here, like it's kind of arched itself, and I don't think that's necessarily how it was made, but just how it literally adapted to the foot and just started pulling up into that area. So this would have been very narrow waist, very supportive of the arch area of the foot, and still has, you know, fairly pronounced vertical space rather than horizontal space in order to have enough room for the foot. This is a wool that probably has gone through a fair amount of color change. You can kind of see the purple versus blue. How many do I have? A lot more than I have down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I've got 25 plus pairs right now down here. Almost everything is pairs. The only single shoes I have are my 18th century and some weird sample things I'm going to show you in a moment. But one of the things I really like about this pair is the stitching. See if I can get it to focus enough. It's got this weird hand-done like cross stitching on top of it, which I think it's like a herringbone stitch essentially. It's just really pretty, and I don't normally see that done. It's done all around all of the edges to sort of finish them off, and I'm just looking at that going, that is an absurd. Like, it's tiny, it's a really fine thread, and it's gotta be just decorative. And I'm like, why? What? Why would you do that? And so what looks like a very practical, because, you know, they've worn down so much and all of that, it looks like a very practical pair of shoes. It's definitely had a lot of wear and tear over the years. Is also very excessively made, I guess is a way of putting it. Like, that was not necessary by any means. To do that, so I don't know. It's not like super reinforcing. It's not what was used to hold everything together necessarily. So I don't know. I don't know why they did that, but it looks really cool. So fun times. It has a tongue, which is again indicative of, you know, 1830s and onwards. They start doing side lacing boots in like the 18 teens, but they don't tend to have tongues at the start of all of that. Lots of little holes. This one, I don't think is spiral laced. It might be actually. Look at that. So if you look down there, it's kind of offset at the beginning. So this one might be spiral laced. It's a little hard to tell just because this isn't straight up and down. So we're not talking about something meeting top and bottom in the same way. So when I hold it like that, you can see it might actually, comparative to the flatness of the foot, it might actually come across as spiral laced. So I think this one might be spiral laced. But, hi, oh, you're twitching. Okay, you're having a dream. That's why I was like, what are we doing? So yeah, this was like a little add-on for the other side lacing boots to just kind of compare, but I was very excited about finding something with this toe because in images you can see why it looks almost flared in portraits and artwork and things like that. Wool in general is water repellent. So if you put water droplets onto wool, it repels them. It takes a ton of water. I can't remember so many times its own weight before it starts to feel wet. So wool in itself and specific types of wool were really popular for shoes because of their water resistance. At some point, you're gonna get your feet wet, but ideally if it's wet out and you wear wool stockings and you have leather and wool on your feet, it's pretty good. And there's other things to do about that too, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, in general, shoemaking is just very different than, the way it is today. We don't really make things for people the way that we do now. So, those things probably in that purplish range would be my guess. Just because that's what the stains look like. My bet is with these, just because that's what... So the best guess is that color inside of there. And that it turned to the bluish because of it was the exposure. But you can see like it probably had something on top of it that was preventing it from getting the same oxidization, both top and bottom. So honestly, this is looking at the shape of this, the other shoe was probably sitting right there on top of it for a long time, and that helped keep this a little bit more purple. But the best way to tell what color something was originally is see how deep you can get into it. And so I'm gonna guess it was something closer to that. So, yeah. Oh yeah, and wool doesn't pick up smells in the same way. I mean, if you get it wet, it will smell a bit like wet sheep, but that's a whole different thing. So, how did I get, depends on which job at Colonial Williamsburg you're talking about, because I had many different jobs at Colonial Williamsburg, and that's really the point, is more just, I took a job and then just kept taking other jobs. Technically, up until some point later today, I only have women's shoes, but I have my first pair of men's shoes arriving, today, which I'm pretty sure are men's shoes. Like, I need to 100%, like, verify that when they come in. But it's just hard to find men's shoes, aside from, like, more modern 20th century. Finding 19th century or further back men's shoes is very rare. So, to be honest, I think I paid more for the pair of shoes coming today, which is just a really simple pair of, early, potentially pretty early 19th century men's shoes. More on those than any of my other shoes, I think. But yeah, so the next set I just found on Etsy. I wasn't even looking for this sort of thing because I didn't think I would come across it. I'm trying to think of how to explain this before I even, in the past, when shoemaking was done on a larger manufacturing scale, which has been for a while, it's not just a matter of apprentices or things like that. But once you move into the mass manufacturing of shoes, there are shoemaking schools and places that teach how to do that, and there still are today. And they're going to have samples of how to make shoes back then and today. But usually those samples get handled so much, they just kind of get tossed. Hello, Paula! And so this set of shoes actually survived. It's from around 1920, and I was literally just looking something. I know they're out for delivery. That's why I'm like staring at my front door. Like that. But I'll share them on like Instagram and whatnot if they come in after this, which they probably will. It's not usually that early in the day. I'm seated in an awkward place on this sofa right over the beam because the dog that you cannot see is right here. Like she is immediately to my side. And that is the pillow that she has determined is the pillow for the day. So getting her to move will be difficult. So the next set is, like, I just happened across these. They came from, like, Iowa or something. And so it's a pair and two individuals. The first one I'm going to show is this one. And these are sample shoes for teaching. So they actually have the little patches on the bottom that explain what's going on with them. So in this case, sock lining cut away to show the stitching on the insole of the Mackay sole. So Mackay stitching, I've shown before, it's when we cut, you can kind of see, I'll show you on one of the other ones, it's really obvious, and then it stitches through the whole thing. So this is an Oxford, the heel has not been put on yet, so you can see what the sole would look like underneath where the heel goes on. And this one is, like I said, they pulled the last and they cut away the sock lining, so you can see the stitching right there of the interior. So you can see the nails that go through, so they would be put in through this side and hit the metal plate that's on the bottom of lasts when we start doing that commonly. And then you can see the stitching that would be done by the Mackay machine most of the time. This is actually the least exciting one, in my opinion, out of the grouping, which is saying something. So there's this Oxford, the other Oxford, which still has its last in it, and this one specifically says turned sole, lasting, complete, and sole ready for heeling. So this shows a different construction method in which they did a turn shoe construction method, and the whole thing was put back onto this last. It's rare that you can find a last and know what it is because it still has the shoe in it. So what's cool is this is an Oxford last, so this is meant for Oxfords or perhaps somewhat open shoes. And this would be that sample, like I said, without, it's a turn shoe, so this doesn't get hammered. It would have been stitched the whole way around, and then the heel would be applied to that area. You can see some sort of remnant little hammer marks there, and also the size on it, which is the early size. So, right, I guess that might not be the size. It might be something else entirely going there, like what number for the heel that they need or something. But, or B. This is B. This is a 4B, so it'd be about a size 6 US, size 4 UK. So it's not terribly far off from a very practical. It's just under my size. I compared it to my last, which is a very similar shape, and it's like just that like ½ inch shorter. So it's very close, but this is the same shape of the last that I made. Like it is very similar long toe shape, so that's why I know it's right around the 1920 period. It's got like that lovely arch right there, and so I am probably going to pop this last out and send it off to be reproduced. There's a good chance of that. Like it's a little, I don't know, it's a little scary, but the coolest part with this is the fact that in addition to that, there's also a pair of boots that are also in progress, and so we can actually see the difference between the last four, because they're the same size, the last, and very much the same shape, the last for a boot and the last for a Oxford, where it's kind of hard to see, but the toe on the boot, you can see it's a much higher toe. Might need to hold it over here just in front of something lighter, but it's like a higher space, it's a little bit bigger, a little, you know, it's much like we would think boots need to fit, just a little bit thicker socks, that sort of thing. So this was like, I can see exactly the differences that they have in two lasts that are very much the same style, but one's meant for boots, one's meant for Oxfords, and just see what the differences are in the overall shapes for these. And so the boots are actually in two in-between states. So this is also a welted shoe. So this one says welt shoe, inseamed, sole laid, and outsole stitched. And this one says welt shoe, bottoming complete, ready for heeling. So this is kind of like the next step. So you can actually see where they've pulled the little flip back, that little section of leather that they cut in and did the stitching into the welt there. So that's the sort of shoe that I just did my Oxford. Like this, I'm like, this would have been useful, you guys. I know, these were like different listings on some random antique store in Iowa's Etsy page, and I was like, and messaged him because it was like, you know, if you're gonna be buying multiple things, message us and let us know, and you know, we'll get it set up so it ships, da da da. And he's like, you know, I was hoping someone would find these that would actually, like, you know, appreciate them. They're pretty, I think they're pretty cool. And I'm like, oh, you have no idea how much I appreciate them. But you can see, like, because it is welted on, but it's just stitched, like, that's still loose, and so you can actually, like, see up inside how the uppers are dealt with going over. And the best part, there's actually a little metal shank in there. It's gonna be kind of hard to get it to focus on that particular spot more so than anything else, considering the angle that I'm working at. But there's actually a metal metal shank, which is something relatively newish in this era. But another reason why I actually want to pop the last out of this, just to see what it feels like, to guarantee, like, that's what a metal shank feels like. But, you know, this is still cut wide. It's not cut down. It's not nailed down yet like that one is, and then cut to the correct shape and size and all of that, and all the finishing done. But, so yeah, the differences. Yeah, it's just fun. It was very random to come across this, these examples of all of that. Like, this would definitely have been done by machine, but even with machine, one of the cool things, you can see how tiny the stitches are in front and then how not tiny they are in back. But once everything gets closed up, like, and finished, they all just disappear anyway. Like, why are your stitches so small if you're not gonna see them anyway? And I know it's just the machine that does that, so it doesn't really matter, but they're inserted into like a little open channel there. So those are cool. Like, they're not exciting styles, but it's really cool from the perspective of a teaching tool, and getting to compare different things of the same era. Non-taut options for heel and toe stiffening pre-1900. I haven't ripped apart shoes to find out. Most of the time what I find inside is a lighter color. So most of the time I think it is tawed, in some format or another. But if you're trying to be 100% historically accurate, that's what I found so far. But the stuff that you can get for inside of most modern shoes is also, they also have lighter color options. So it's just done with like modern dyeing processes and finishing processes rather than being a vegetable tan. It's chrome tanned, in which they can get a light color. The reason for the light color is the fact that if it gets wet, it won't leach through whatever lighter color fabrics you have. So, you know. So yeah, I'm not going to take these apart, but I am going to take the lasts out of some of them and put them back in potentially. This one's got some extra little fabric bits inside, which I think are protective, in order to keep stuff from being damaged. I'm wondering, because it's kind of stitched on randomly to this lining, but it's loose, and so I do wonder if that's part of their process of making sure that the white linings stay cleaner by having this sort of like hanging thing. And so that's something else I kind of want to dig in there and see how much of that, because this would just get the stitches ripped out and pulled out. So I am curious about that as well. So more things that I am curious, because it's in both of them. And I don't think it was put in there for the purposes of the fact that they're like sample shoes. So I am not a shoe doctory person, so I honestly don't know what's good for different, as outside of my realm. But no different than you can look at, like, you can get told what modern shoes work for you. It's just a matter of finding the right shapes, the right eras. So yeah, this was a very fun random find. Okay, I haven't shown the 18th century shoes in a while, so let's do that really quickly. And then we'll move on to some other things, which I can just, at that point, like, start pulling out ones that people might have questions about. I apologize if this gets a little bit loud. So, this one is my 18th century baby. And it still has a fairly high heel. It has a very pointed toe, so it's in that transitional 1780s range. It does not have the strap. It's moved beyond that being the fashion, so we're at open pump. Really common styling of having decorations over the toe and the ribbon trim. My camera's like, so many whack things to figure. So it had something on the toe, as you can see. There's a little scarring from it. I don't know what, though. I don't know if it, I feel like it had to have been removed by choice, which makes me think that it wasn't just a rosette, but it's hard to say. It definitely wasn't embroidered. There's not enough scarring for that, but it was something that went on. And you can see, like, maybe you can kind of see the shadows of it, not just the stitches, but like there's Honestly, it looks like there's little, something that was almost drawn onto this or rubbed it or something. So I'm not sure what it was, but there's tons of different options for things that went on the little fronts of shoes. But these are just like super classic styling. Hi, how are you? You wake up? Yeah, you're sleepy. Obviously the silk on these is shattering, which is not atypical for older silks, especially ones that are dyed black. That's pretty typical. It's not necessarily all the same chemical reasons that they shatter in, say, the 19th century, but, you know, there's still a lot of metals that go into dyeing of fabrics in the 18th century. So this is just a really typical example. It has Witthaw lining for the actual uppers because it's such a lightweight silk. It has the sort of sock insole that is out of a beaded linen, so it's super shiny linen. And you can see the holes there from where it was nailed to the last, so that way it could be cut down. Nope, black is very common. Black has always been, though it is historically more difficult to achieve the further back you go, therefore more expensive. So if anything, you go back far enough, it's not a mourning color so much, just an expensive color. Black has just always been popular. The thing that defines mourning versus not is one, age. Typically entire outfits for mourning are really more of a 19th century thing. In the 18th century it was more commonly to like tie a black band, like a ribbon, around your arm or put a black ribbon on your cap or things like that. Things that you wouldn't normally put there. And the key thing that defines mourning versus not, especially in the 19th century where they got really obsessed with it, is that it is not shiny. This is shiny, cannot be mourning. End of sentence. Like, that is done and done. If it is shiny or sparkly in any way, it is not mourning. Mourning blacks are completely flat. Like, they make them out of bumpy wool crepes and things like that, so that way it is not shiny. So, yeah, that is... Black is less the defining factor because mourning can also be, depending on how far into mourning you are, it can be lavender, it can be gray. It's the fact that it's not shiny. That's the more important thing. So... other than that, black is just the most common color. But, you know, another thing Coco Chanel did not invent, the little black dress. That's been around forever. That's just a standard. So, yeah, I purchased this off of eBay before antique and vintage stuff started getting popular. So this was 2014 or something. And so I managed to splurge and get a single shoe for not too much money, comparative to what it would be otherwise. Finding that sort of thing now is just, now people have realized that there's stuff and they want it. They just keep buying things. So the prices have gone up. There is, of note, the front of this. So the back portion here is Witthaw for the quarters. The front, the vamp lining, is a linen. But because this is shredding, you can kind of see it. So the toe here, the pointed toe, you can still see the linen, but on the sides here it is Witthaw. So what you can see through is the Witthaw there, and so there's like a little reinforcement sort of curved bit that would be right there that would help sort of keep it from where the joint of your foot would be pushing too much and ripping things. So, yep, yeah. Yeah, like I said, black is more expensive the further back you go, but 18th century, excuse me, black is not that expensive. Oh, the dust I stir up with these shoes. I'll start coughing. My methods for dating a shoe, lots and lots of years of looking at shoes, and images of shoes and portraits, and shoes that have specific dates on them, like wedding shoes, which I always take with a grain of salt because a lot of times it's the wrong person listed. Or it wasn't their wedding shoe, and they just like to think, oh, we saved it because it's their wedding shoe, and it's just one of their shoes. So, yeah. But yeah, my methods are just way too much time looking at shoes. Yeah, one of my friends, she does stuff on YouTube occasionally, Couture Courtesan, so Samantha is really specialized in mourning clothing. She knows a ton about it. So it's just one of those topics where you get a lot of people that try to argue back with you. It's just frustrating. Same thing with like corsets or whatever, because people think they know. It's a popular enough topic that people think they know so much that they will argue back with you. So, but yeah, this is a great example of late 18th century shoe style. This was in some sort of museum at some point, probably a more local house museum, but because it is not in good condition, the fringe is falling apart and everything. They probably deaccessioned it, so I'm like, I'll take it. You know, I can appreciate this regardless of what quality state it's in, so like the current situation of its existence is not important to me. Oh, laces. That is a complicated one. I don't know a ton about those. Like, I've started to keep an eye... Like, you can definitely look at a lot of original shoes in museums. A lot of them still have the original laces, but... Alright, keep drinking water. So... one of my favorite places to just start scrolling through, because they have tons of different stuff, is the... I think the easiest way to look it up is the Russian Shoe Museum. He has a really, it's technically his personal collection. He has a really extensive and fairly well dated. Like, I disagree with his dating way less. And it tends to be off by like, I'd put more like 5 years later or something. Like, it is usually, like, we're pretty much on the same level with that comparison to a lot of museums where interns, yeah. Construction differ from 19th century. So there are multiple construction techniques. Turn shoe is the one that is most common in early or randed. And then as we get into the 19th century, welting becomes more common for women's shoes, but is common for men's shoes earlier. And then they come up with other, like Mackay stitch and channel stitch. But channel stitch, like, that's the thing, is like all of the techniques exist. They just become more or less common for, you know, different reasons. So, I think my dress is cotton. It's from Voryog, as is a lot of stuff. So, magical things. YouTube keeps wanting me to put in ads for you guys. I'm like, not right now. It's like, you've been doing this for? Yeah, so, I'd say about half my shoes have their original laces. Like the further forward we get, like the more recent shoes are more likely to have it. Plenty of my older ones do as well. This one, sorry for the fact that it's gonna be kind of bright. I don't want to adjust my tones if I don't have to. This pair is at that like 18 teens point. We still have this funky little heel. This has its original, which is just a silk ribbon. So nothing particularly spectacular about that. It's just a flat woven, plain woven silk ribbon. So early laces in a lot of cases are just that. Like this one's a little bit later, probably more 1820s, and it's just got a plain woven silk as well. It's a little bit heavier, that sort of thing. So yeah, the tiny heel's weird. It's a weird era. They're not sure what they're doing about heels in that era. They kind of go back and forth, and they almost don't get rid of them, but then they do, and then they come back. So, yeah, always ways to determine if a shoe is built for a certain profession. They really didn't do that so much until we get into the 20th century. And then, even then, like, you look at World War I or even World War II uniform shoes, especially for women's uniforms, it's less, here's a shoe made for it. It's more here is a shoe that would qualify for it, because they don't have the ability to issue large quantities right at the beginning of the wars. So by the end of World War II, then they have shoes that they're actually issuing. Prior to that, it's just like Oxford, plain Oxford, just plain Oxford. Do I ever sell my shoes? I probably would. I will at some point when I get overwhelmed. I'll probably get rid of some things that I don't really need anymore in terms of usefulness, but at the moment, I'm not overwhelmed just yet. I'm trying to, like, pull back on that, but I said I try to, if I can get everything I need out of the shoe from looking at pictures, I will do that. But the moment I look at something and go, I need to have that next to something else. I need to look at it more closely to compare something. And, like, no number of pictures can really fix that for me then. Or if it's something that I think is, I don't have a similar example or unusual, and it's not outrageously expensive. And, you know, just so yeah. But I mean, most of the time, most of these are, I'm always glad to show them. So I don't know if you guys have any particular era. Thank you so much, Catherine. So if you guys have a particular era or a thing you're curious about, I know I went really briefly over shoemaking construction. That was probably not thorough enough. Problem is most of these are not really going to show what I need to do with that. Like, it's hard to talk about. Turn shoe, the stitches are invisible, and the other ones, it's still visible stitching on the outside. It just depends on how it's inserted because the wear and tear. I think that's kind of the difference, is like, how did you hide your stitching, or did you bother to hide your stitching, which kind of defines how you put a shoe together. How much money do I spend on shoes on average? I have purchased shoes for $15. I've purchased shoes for over $400 for a pair. After I get past that point, I like, they better be worth it. Most of the time, I try to keep like in the 100s or something like that for most things. So it just depends on what comes my way and how how much I've spent on other things at the time, and you know, that sort of stuff. So yeah, strangest, most expected thing that came with a pair of shoes. I don't know. I mean, the fun ones for me were the ones where like the Perugia, finding out like a brand to them that's got like a whole history behind it, since this is like a super famous shoemaking like brand in the 1920s, teens 20s into the 30s, like super famous, super popular, was really influential in changing how shoes looked. But they were not one of the super broad, like popular, like they were a popular brand, but they weren't one of those like mass done brands. So these are apparently pretty rare, as I have found out from somebody who specifically researches them. Over in the UK, there's not a ton of them that survive. And like this one's in pretty decent condition for the fact that it's, you know, it's a pair, but it's white suede. So that's the thing, like where I live currently, there's like no antiques around here really, so I don't end up going to yard sales or thrift stores or things like that, just because the likelihood of me coming across that is not very good. Sorry to see the construction and religious painting. I do not have any clogs or anything that's in that more practical state at this point, just because I haven't come across them. So I pick up things as I hopefully. The vamp. The vamp is this portion here, so it's that front section, and the quarters are this piece. This piece doesn't really have a name because that's not normal. I don't have an original pair of patents, but I have a pair of overshoes that I've made, which is in that same range of things. So I do have a pair of 18th century style overshoes that were way too over-engineered. Like, they're accurate, but so it just depends. But there are a ton of surviving ones from around the 1740s for children's shoes. For some reason, I don't know. Shoes, the further back you go, shoes get really weird, because there's this period of time where it's really hard to find any examples. 17th century, it's really hard to find any examples, but right about the point that we hit 1720s to like 1760s, there's so many. They're just like, you go to any collection that has anything remotely old in it, and there's just tons of them. And like, just tons. And then suddenly there's way less for the next few decades, and then we get to square toe and they just explode again. It's just really weird. I don't know. Companies that were making women's shoes in the US in the early 1900s that are still around, probably. Most of them have just gotten like purchased and name changes and things like that. It's hard to say, because a lot of the way shoe manufacturing was done in the past wasn't so much a company produces their own shoes, but a shoemaking company makes shoes and then sells them to shoe sales companies, and then they put their stamp on it or information on it and go from there. So it's a little bit difficult. There was a huge shoemaking manufacturing up in Massachusetts and that region, like the New England area, massive quantities of that up until pretty recently. There's actually shoemaking, like specifically shoemaking museum up there. which I wanted to go to, but was like closed randomly the day that I went. So, I don't put any marks on my shoes currently. I think that they're pretty obviously modern, but I would like to start doing that. I just need to design one. I've been working on it, but like usually the designs for things, they're not very exciting. So it's kind of, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'm still going to be here for probably close to another hour, to be honest. I'm used to doing these for about 2 hours, so. It's not that they use like fabric. I think styles just changed quickly. They're also very lightweight shoes for like about 100 years there, and so I think they just didn't survive as well. Or they were. One of my other prospects is that like it's a weird era, and they made such pretty little shoes, dainty pretty little shoes. I wonder how many of them just were literally displayed in the house because they were pretty versus put in a trunk because they were clunky and ugly. And that's why it didn't survive, because it was sitting out with all of the smoke and nicotine and sunlight and unair, like everything. I do wonder if like the pretty one, like there's this, the pretty ones survive is very true. The small and pretty things that didn't get worn out survive. But I also wonder if at some point things that are displayable, like shoes, reach a point where the prettiest got displayed and destroyed. I wonder sometimes. So, but yeah, I really like these under the fact of, you know, there's a story of the maker with them, and all of that. And I really like my 1867 pair, because they have the stamp here for the Universal Exposition. So, or I guess if you want to say it correctly, Exposition Universelle, from Paris of that year, which means that this was meant to be a show-off pair of shoes, which again speaks to the fact that we're looking at guaranteed 1867 here, because I can look up like when these happened. It's still straight last, which again speaks to the concept of the European regions weren't transitioning to a right-left quite as fast. So yeah, but this is the closest I've gotten to the 1851. There are some 1851 exposition, Grand Exposition shoes in the UK still, but a lot of them actually ended up in Australia. So there is a museum in Australia that got this huge quantity of really great examples of antique shoes, because a shoemaker moved down there and he had been collecting antique shoes, and he moved down there and donated them to the Powerhouse Museum. And I am like, I need to get to that museum. So I'm like, dating cowboy boots, man, I have no idea. Do I wear commercially made shoes? Yes, I do. Kind of. Most of the shoes that I wear that I don't make I have quite a few from Everlane that are just like regular flats, hence the Everlane box. I get a lot of them lately from Joe Bear Boots, which it's kind of in that like, you know, small company range. And then I basically live in the Sabah slippers and shoes around the house. I need to get more of these. I'm going to wear these out before too long. So, but they're actually made the same way that they would have been made in like the 18th century. So I love them. If you need a pair of 18th century house slippers, Sabah is the place to go for that. Just go with the brown leather or something. Perfect. So, yep. So many rabbit holes, man. So many rabbit holes. So, why did they start doing right and left shoes? So here's the thing. They used to do right and left shoes. And then when heels started to become a thing, they went to straight last. So in the 17th century, it switches really, like it starts a little bit in the 16th century, but really in the 17th century, it switches back to straight last, or switches to straight last for the first time. Like I guess, essentially, because, you know, we don't do lasts all the way back. And then, this is elastic. That's why it's so dead. All the rubbers died. And then we switch back to right and left because they think it might be healthier for the feet. They're really obsessed with foot health in the mid 19th century, and health in general. They get really, they're trying to figure out how to make things healthier. They do it all very, very wrong. And then eventually listen to some of the people that are right, like wash your hands. Yeah, so elastic gussets like this became really popular in the 1840s. The Queen Victoria was one of the ones that popularized that particular style. Like, it was popular in general, but she started wearing it, and so Congress boots, as they were called, hugely took off in the 1840s, and for men and women. But obviously, the type of elastic that rubber that they were using at that time does not hold up to the ages. Heck, I mean, I pulled something out recently that's only like 5 years old. I was like, the elastic is shot on this, so you know, it only lasts so long. But yes, yeah, Sabah, yeah, Sabah. Really good brand. But yeah, Powerhouse collection. Oh, I know. I need like reasons I need to go to Australia. The Powerhouse Museum shoes. But yeah, this is a great example of like, you know, fancy shoe stuff. It's a pretty little button and tassel there. I get that too. Yeah. Move it towards center. Everything's off. Little pull tabs, which I think is really cool as well. But it has, I think this one's broken, free, but the other one's still contained. But sorry, there's a weird noise outside all of a sudden. I don't know what that was. I find it interesting, like the cementing that they used to add this to the heel kind of bled through and aged over time, but it is still a hand stitch. Like, this is a turn shoe. So it's not glued together, it's stitched together, it's just the stitching is invisible. But the difference you can tell is the fact that around the edges it's not like super solid. You can kind of see little bumps. Sometimes if a shoe's been worn, you can see like a ladder effect of bumps there, but on the side here you can sort of see it's a little wavy in the fabric, and that's what tells me it's stitched instead of glued together, which starts really 1840s. They start cementing shoes together, they go through a fad of doing it, and then it kind of fades out because the quality, it gets, like, people that are producing, I always want to say gutta percha, I don't know, is sort of adulterating what they're putting out, so it stops being popular, but they come up with new versions. So yeah, I have not encountered I think most of the stuff that's full on like proper rubber shoes, rubber Wellingtons and things like that from that era have pretty well died. It's one of the reasons why I am super obsessed with the 1851 exhibition, because that's when vulcanite and all those rubbers really got introduced and took off, and like there's so much, it is, I don't want to go on for the next hour about the 1851 exhibition, but I could. It's on my someday list to talk about at great length, just because in my opinion it is the point that we kind of like, every historian kind of has, that studies that era, has an opinion of what point we turn into the modern era, or like how to define it. For me, it's 1851 that really like is peak of that. Because so many inventions happened, and it's the first World's Fair, essentially, before they called them World's Fair. And that was when trains became really big in the UK, you know, just before that, and they made it feasible for average everyday citizens to make it to this. And they, like, near the end of its run, like, gave discounts and things like that. So it's when average people would have been first exposed to not just technology, but also things around the world. That comes with good and with bad. Lots of bad with this, because essentially they just had living human exhibits, as was typical, but in that era, but not on the level that a lot of the later ones would, from what I've been able to find. But it's when they built the Crystal Palace, and all of that. So essentially it was just the fact that not only did these things exist and a lot of like big inventions were made during that year, but it's the first time that people would have been exposed and being able to see things, because they didn't have TV movies. Most people didn't have books full of pictures and images. They didn't have newspapers full of pictures and images, so they never would have seen any of that stuff before. And the dramatic difference that you would have on like society going forward, not just inventions wise, but just culturally, like the exposure to things. So World's Fairs in their early formats were just essential, I think, for opening up the world and getting people exposed to things. and all of that. So yeah, they're just amazing things. But this is a great example of, one of the later ones, 1867, that took place after that. So my favorite decade, oh man, I go back and forth a lot. Like, I am really in love with that early, like late teens, early 1920s, late 19 teens era, but there's so many other time periods that have so many beautiful things. Like this era, like 1860s, is just super classy about the like proportions and style of it. But there's just so many fun things. I do also really love the 1890s, like super pointed stuff. It's just because it's just fun. Low heel, super pointed. It's just such a weird era. So I don't know. This is weirdly one of my favorites that I haven't made yet. I do want to do a last for this in the near future and actually do some things from this. So yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I could see that. In 1960 and 1970, there's definitely a big inspiration for this. Yeah, the fabric on this, which is worn down, so therefore faded out, it's woven in. It's kind of worn down over the time, but it's got a lovely little reflectiveness to it with that. It's just like a good classic style. And the pointed toe, the nice thing that I like to point out about pointed toes is how long they are for that reason. Like, they're not short pointed toes. That'd be uncomfortable. There's enough room for your feet here. Like, if it was a rounded shoe, it'd be, that short. Like, we would be cutting off that much in order to make it a round style. Or even a square style, it'd stop there if it was a square style or something like that. So they're not any more narrow. They just go really far. And speaking of cowboy boots, and there's a fair bit of upturn to the toe so that way you can still walk and not have it catch on things too much. These haven't really been little bits of paper falling off worn, but they are the leather's not holding together. It's kind of chipping off, so it's dried out. I'm not going to do anything about that because the way I like to explain it is the more you do, you cannot undo anything you do. And there are things that you can do, like putting structure inside to make sure that things don't get wrinkles and deflate, which I 100% support doing. I need to make sure that I do that for all of my shoes. It's on my list. But I won't go into most of my antiques and actually rehydrate. Like, this is flaking off at this point. It is not in a state where that would be worthwhile. I'm not trying to display these. So my best bet is just to keep them in a safe area in terms of temperature and humidity, and keep them structurally sound rather than try and do a whole bunch of applications of things to make them look better. Yeah, I will probably try to do last reproduction in the future. That's something that I think would be practical for me to do. I'm not going to ever reproduce shoes personally. If someone else comes and is like, this is something I want to do, I'll be like, I can gladly help. But I am not personally doing that. I've done enough of that. I don't like it. Like, I don't mind the design portion. I don't want to actually do the technical portions of business running, physically holding things. Like, no. Yeah, so all of our preservation methods are imperfect. They just inevitably will be. And that's why, in general, most of the museum practice things that we talk about now are how little can we do to make sure that it doesn't get worse. Because for a long time in the 20th century, a lot of efforts were pretty extreme, and they actually ruined things. Because they were trying to find a way to make something almost eternal. And they would do things like pull all the moisture out of it and try to replace it with a synthetic version of something, that like a resin-based thing, and it would shatter stuff and destroy them. So generally, the stuff that you do to make sure that antique clothing, shoes, whatever, make sure that it doesn't have pests, freeze it if you need to, make sure that it isn't covered in dust, vacuum things off. Like you can lay there, the way that they generally do vacuuming is there's something gets laid across it to make sure that nothing large gets sucked up and vacuuming occurs. So that way it gets rid of anything dust-wise in there, which is good. And then most of the time you just leave it from there. You don't spray things on it. You don't do major hydrations or things like that. So, like there are cases where I think it's worthwhile, but especially in the case of shoes, where once you get them into the state, they are pretty solid objects, comparison to clothing, which when it gets handled gets pushed and like, you know, smushed and folded and things like that. It takes constant movement and handling, so it needs to be in a condition where it can do that. This is what it is. Like, once I stuff this thing full, it's pretty solid, so I don't have to worry about things being like flexible and hydrated in the same way. If anything I do to it, we may find out in 50 years, because they're only recent processes, we may find out in 50 years that it's really bad. And so I'd rather just not do anything and just keep them climate controlled and away from pests. That's like 90% of what we need to be doing. I'm just going to put a shoe on my lap while I take a drink and talk about other things. We're just like, here's a shoe. So my efforts are going to, like, I have stuff to hydrate, but I generally won't. I mean, I've done it to my own shoes more so than anything else. So, yeah, the less I do, the better off they probably will be. Do I like 1950s style shoes? I find them interesting. I'm not personally fond of them for my own style as much. I find some of them really interesting, but I prefer more like 1940s weirdness. There's like the experimental 1940s stuff I really like. I used to wear a lot of 1950s style stuff when I was younger, but that has changed. So, oh yeah, like the explorer style clothing. I love the fact that they're actually going back to older things like wool instead of synthetics and things like that. I do know Rose Anvil. I actually have like some of their leather, like camera equipment stuff too. I don't mind cutting shoes and boots in half when they're modern. Like, when they're not necessarily like, you know, antiques that you can't find. Like, I wouldn't be able to find this shoe again. This is what it is. And, you know, you go from there. But if it's something that's modern, mass produced, and you can, I don't even, it's not even that modern. Nope, I think it's understandable. Because they're not doing it because, how was this made? They're doing it from a, is this quality, should you buy it? So, totally appreciate that. Just because it's hard to show all of that. Oh yeah, so many things done to paintings and other things over the eras, trying to prevent air from getting into them, water from getting into this. Like, no, just put them in a big box, a room, a box, whatever it is that's just safe. And the nice thing is, where I live currently, though, it is very dry and will do some damage due to that. It's better than being in a super humid place, or a place that goes back and forth a ton, or a place that gets and there aren't very many pests here. So, yeah. This pair is a pair of children's Oxfords. They are metal eyelets that have greened. they're not really shiny anymore. They have that weird like film over it that the idea of kind of, it's one of those textures that does like, nope, I'm not okay with. So they are a little bit of lower heel, so it's like, obviously we can say 1850s or later. They have that like somewhat rounded square toe that you see right around that time period for more practical styles. So I do think they might be in that range more so. I'm finding a little bit of evidence of some weird square toe stuff, late 80s, early 90s, 1880s or 1890s, that there was like this weird square toe thing. So I've been looking into that too, because the heel shape on this is kind of like, could be either. It's not so low as to scream 1890, but it isn't quite what I expect. But that's the thing, it's a children's shoe. So it only tells me so much, because stylistically things are going to most often be a little bit more like toned down from the extremes of fashion. So, Paley snoring. I will check my Instagram messages. Lots of things get lost in there, so sorry if I don't always respond to people. But yeah, these are all leather. So this leather here is going to be different than this. This is Morocco. So you can see the texture on it. It's a goat leather. and it probably would have been a much stronger green originally. I don't know if these are green and brown or if it's green and something else. It's hard to tell. With tall lining, they're stuffed with some sort of wool. I need to pull that out and put something better in. It's probably very old at this point. And I do think that they are original because it's laces because of the green cord, which is not a typical sort of cord that you find anymore. So it'd be weird for them to replace it with something that is honestly hard to find and matches. Yeah, Bailey is very asleep and very smushed into her pillow right now. Let's see if I could show you. Is this? Give me 1 second. Move things slightly. That's what I'm dealing with next to me. Like, I feel like that's just most days. Like, that level of comfort. I'm just like, I'm jealous of whatever she's got. Oh my goodness. Yep. But yeah. Yep, they used to shave down paintings on wood boards, yep, and then attach to things, like so many things that they did. They did so much effort to bring it up to modern. It's just like, oof. Yeah. Paley and Julian. So, yeah, and that's what I mean, like, everything fades to some extent, or it gets super dusty. Like, I guarantee if I hydrated this pair and cleaned it up, you'd see the color more. Like, you can see it when I get it. It's even more vivid in the camera right now than it is in person. But frankly, these are just super worn down and dusty. Like, a lot of it's just abrasion. So, yeah, like, these have been pretty well loved and worn over the years. Probably worn until the kid couldn't fit the foot in anymore. Would be my guess. Another great example I have of kids' Oxfords. So this is, from what I can tell, the type of Oxford that would have actually been issued in like children's schools or orphanages or things like that as well. So you can see we've right, left. This is one of those that I'm wondering, because I've actually found some example images from around the 1890s that look like this, that have this sort of, like early 1890s, that have this sort of heel, that have a long but square. So I'm wondering if this might actually date to around then. I've kind of struggled to figure out how to date these shoes because it is a red Morocco, would be how it would be considered, in the same way we call like dogs red. And that's a type of shoe that, like, if you've read the original versions of the Red Dancing shoes, that whole thing, she was talking about shoes like this, made out of this sort of thing, these little red Morocco children's shoes. So it wouldn't be terribly different from this. This is just a little bit later, I think. Again, the square toe threw me for a while, and I was like, is this 1850s? But like the narrowness of it versus usually it's pretty straight. 1850s, 1860s, it's not nearly as narrowed. And like I said, I started to find some little advertisements and things like that that showed similar Oxfords to this right around 1890 that had a randomly square toe. And so I'm just like, okay, I don't know. Who knows? I have not used Leather Honey or any of those. But so I just like the little stacked heel in the back, and has it like good curve underneath as well. And yeah, it's just interesting that, like, you know, they didn't put a heel on it, but they stacked it, so you have all of that. You know, it's just, they're a good example. The stitching is coming apart, but that does mean you can kind of see. Let's see if I can pull this back gently. You know, a little bit more vivid color that would have been. The camera's actually doing a great job of making these things like much more saturated than they actually are in my hands, which I find interesting. But yeah, this would have been. And I don't think it really got worn very much, if at all. Like, there's a little bit of wear in a few spots, so I think it was just kind of like worn inside for a little bit, but which stands to my concept of this might have been like issued out and worn inside instead of actually purchased specifically for a kid. I also really love the tongue in this. It's got like a scalloped top to it, which I think is, no, focus. Yeah, scalloped. top to that, which I think is really cool. So, yeah, I'm sure most antiques in the world do disappear into the dumpster ether, as it were. Hi. I'm surprised you have not wanted to move at all. Speaking of shoes in poor condition that I haven't shown. Hi. It's because children's shoe. Children have small feet. So this boot, you can see a good example of boots that I pick up that are in not good condition. The one that it pairs with is a little bit better condition. This heel is just something about the finishing that they did on this, I guess, or something. It has literally just eaten away at the leather. I don't know what's going on there. Because obviously it's kind of, I think of it kind of like the pyramids, where it just ends up being like stepped instead of smooth. But like you can tell the stuff that's on the leather too sort of melted at some point and stuck to each other. You can see like the lines that run across there, so it stuck to its pair or a different shoe. Its buttons are kind of falling off. One's attached by way of safety pin, etc., etc. So it's a good example of why a lot of shoes did not survive, because they literally fell apart. Like why would you keep this? Yeah, there's definitely a lot of dry rot happening here. And that's like starting to peel away from underneath the heel, but you can also see like how far back that would have been like cut back and how thin this piece is that gets put up into the heel breast and attached. So, it's at least a size 7, maybe closer to size 8. I might have a size in it. It was made in Albion, New York. It is a... that's a lot of numbers that are not very useful. Yeah, they're doing this stupid code thing where they're faking it. I think it's a 6 historical, so 8 modern. Or 6 UK. Like 39, 40. But yeah, the other heel's in better condition, so I don't know why this one died as much, but something about the condition it was stored in, or maybe bugs. I don't know, it's too even to be bugs. I feel like it's just something that it was up against literally just ate away at it. Like, I don't know another way of putting it. I'm just like, never seen this before. Seen lots of damage on shoes over the years, but like, it's weird. Do you want down? We just went to the other side of the sofa. Where are we going? I can move some things so you can get down. It's safe. You can run across those. Those aren't like fragile. There you go. There's space. Okay, we made it. Okay, I can move slightly further over. But it's just a great example of like, you know, this is why shoes didn't survive, because who would? This isn't pretty to, you know, it's definitely not displayable, and it's definitely not wearable. So yeah, it'd be different. Like, the other one has the beginnings of this sort of damage. It's just weird that it's so evenly damaged. Like, I would imagine it being bumpy if it was chewed on rather than just eroded in some format. And it's not. It's more just like this is a sort of erosion that I would expect from years in the desert of being sand blown. Like, it's not, there's no place in particular that's more chewed than others. It's like evenly, it's just very weird. So, I think it's just whatever was on it was literally like acidic enough that it kind of like ate away at it in like an etched manner. Otherwise I'd expect more like you said, like tooth marks or something. It's a bit pockmarked, but I think that's just because of the leather. So, I don't know. It's weird. No different than like one time when I was in a museum, one of the previous person's notes on the shoes said something about the fact that they were full of little holes in the heel, which is a particular type of wood beetle that I guess is European in nature. So like even etymology can help with these things sometimes. Entomology. So like say, oh, these are likely because like the beetles that eat into the wood like that eat little wood holes, things like that, not a thing over here. Not in the US, specific to Europe. So, weird stuff like that. But yeah, it could definitely be something, like I said, my guess is just because the other one's kind of doing it too, and everything about them is just kind of falling apart. It's just some chemical stuff happened, whether it's in the shoe or next to the shoe. Because I was like, I don't know what was stored next to it. It could have been stored next to something that leaked and acid etched it. I don't know. I don't know where these were stored. I don't know where they came from. So, yeah. So it's kind of one of those, like, hard to judge things. How it was stored and what happened to it. But it's not something I have seen, we'll put it this way, it's not something that I have seen before. And older stuff, I've seen a lot of damaged older stuff, so I'm guessing it has more to do with, like, chemical problems of that era. So, yeah, that's what I mean. Could have been more exposed to light, could have been more exposed to da-da-da. I don't have clogs. That's just not a thing that made it over to the U.S. Commonly, people, when they came over, got rid of them. So, and I haven't been able to purchase from Europe because I haven't really, been able to just wander around Europe buying things. It's just not something that's feasible for me living on the West Coast. So, oh yeah, I mean, especially the more modern ones, the more they get into weird chemicals and things like that, the more it can be detrimental. Especially, like you said, no different than I showed, like how much discoloration there is on that heel cover because of the rubber cement that would have been used. So, need to do anything else fun? I don't know. I've got a whole bunch of other random shoes, but I don't really know of anything else I particularly want to mention with any of those. So I don't think I have any really good. I mean, I have plenty of damaged examples, but honestly, some of my damaged examples are still upstairs because I'm not even bothering to bring those down. So, yeah, tropical beetles definitely seems like that'd be an issue too. So, Bailey, stop chewing on your leg. You are not a chicken bone. Yeah. One of my difficulties with this pair, it's not super obvious. At some point someone wrote something in pencil on it. You can see the H right there. And so there's a whole name. And I can't make it out. It's too worn down. And I'm like, no. The other one's a little bit easier to read. I both love and hate when things are written on shoes because you're just so close. The damage one. Say there, like I said, the mate for it is not quite as heavily damaged, but yeah, it's just, like I said, it looks more like wear and tear. But whatever it is would have had to break through the enamel on the exterior, which is akin to the stuff that's used on piano keys, apparently. That's what I started using. And so it's like bumpy, but it looks more etched and worn rather than chewed on. Chewing is not uncommon, but usually I expect it to be a little more localized rather than the whole thing. So, yeah. Oh, I don't own the painted python boots. The python boots are all the way in Scotland, or not Scotland, in England. I wish I had those. I don't. I do not. So, yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's just weird. It could be chewed on. I just would have expected. Thanks, Bailey. I don't know. Modern shoes made well enough to survive, not normally. Just because of chrome tan leather in general versus veg tan leather and stuff like that. The only reason that they probably will is because now more and more our houses are climate controlled. And so something like this from okay, just a second, 1820 had to survive a lot of years in some really bad climate situations. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna let the dog out. Because, ooh, I'm crunchy. Okay. Let her back in 2 minutes. Okay. Oof. So. Yep. Crickets. I don't know. Oh no. Yeah, no, it's Bailey's own doorbell to let me know. Since when I'm upstairs I can't hear her ask to go out, so we have a doorbell system that runs to the upstairs. Shoe museum and I will. There's so many places that I want to go. But it just takes so much time to get over there for me right now. And like the amount of places I want to go, it's just like, So, but yeah, I do really love this pair of shoes. It's kind of hard to see the texture on them, but they're Morocco leather as well. It's just a slightly different texture. It's almost like a cross-hatched one for it. Straight last, of course, they're early enough for that. But yeah, these I just like look at these. I'm like, these would be so comfortable. Very sweet pair of shoes. Really nice and functional. The pair that's coming, the men's shoes, is actually pretty similar to this. It's just black. But yeah, Allen Edmonds are pretty good quality. I mean, there are plenty of modern made shoes that are good quality. They're made out of good quality materials, but like the vast majority of things knit today are just made out of plastic. Like I said, the thing that will allow them to live longer is if they are not plastic, and the fact that they are in a controlled household situation. Neat. I gotta let the dog in. I'm trying to think what pair of shoes I want to grab next. I haven't showed those. Okay. You could wait another 15 minutes. Come on, let's go. Ooh. That's weird. It's been like rainy. There are worms outside. Which I know to most people in the world, worms after rain makes sense. I've never seen them here. Okay, there you go. Climb on up. Smush yourself in. Okay. How are you so dirty? What did you do? I don't want to touch you. Okay, she's just covered in like rough. She's got, I don't know. I'm not even gonna bother. So, good 1890s pair. Low heel, pretty pointed toe. Not the pointiest, but pretty. These I think were not all black to begin with. The toe is black. You can see there's a slight difference in color. The camera is really good at picking up that. I think she just walked through by something and got brushed off on her. And so, it may be kind of hard to see, but you can see right there in the cracks, it almost looks pink. So I'm wondering if this was in that pink-purple range. I can't quite tell. Like, there's got to be something to that, right? Like, it's soaked through in some format. It's just really weird that it's soaked through in this, like, pinkish-purplish tone. So I don't know. I don't know if it's just a darker color and that's just what it faded to or what happened, but it looks at least like two different leathers, comparison to the toe cap to that. But I really love the cutout work on the strap here. It's really fun. That's one of my favorite little features of that. I mean, there's a little bit of broguing on the toe, which is also really cool, but, and they're pretty well loved, and they do have, sizes on them, if I can get it to focus. So it specifically says a size 3 and 36.5, which I don't know why. So size, because it's not like a modern European size versus it's, so I haven't quite figured out. It might just be something to do with the actual measurements. European sizes used to be based off of measurements. They got a little wonky over the years, but it might be related to that. But yeah, really good little classic style. I haven't showed that one because it's a little bit well worn and all that. It's not like a super eye-catching shoe. Like, it would have been probably pretty when it was in good condition, but yeah. And then one of my favorites, which I always feel like is not the most exciting in reality, but it is to me just because it's one of those like really weird examples of 1860s with this super high toe for healthful reasons. Great example of all the health stuff where it's like right, left, and low heel, which also speaks to that one pair of Oxfords that I showed earlier that I thought might be in that 1850s range. It has very much that same heel. Which is one of the reasons why having like some really random, it might have been magenta or something. Yeah. Like, this is a great example of why having some random things from eras are helpful, because I might look at another pair of shoes that I can't quite place a date on and go, the heel's a little hard for me to understand, but then I can find something that is one of the potential dates and has the same exact heel, and I'll be like, oh, okay, no, that was a common heel in the, like, early 1860s range, so therefore, that heel on that shoe could very well be, because it's hard to show. The light went away again, but yeah, it's very much the same heel, so it would make sense to put the dates of these pretty similar, because it's like very much exactly the same heel. So that'd be my guess. This is just an example of how they took the square toe and made it more healthful without rounding it off necessarily. They just gave it tons of vertical space for that. So, but they're really practical, very sturdy, very like structurally built up. Side lacing, which is probably the last gasp of side lacing, this sort of 1860s style of side lacing, which is different than, you know, the side lacing of, say, the 1850s, which, you know, you're dealing with a much lower style versus that sort of side lacing. This is what it transitions into in the 1860s. So, lined with a twill and a little bit of leather. Apparently my stomach has decided it's hungry. I don't know about this lacing on it. It just feels, I think it's plastic tipped even, so I can't tell. It's hard to tell with the darker colors sometimes whether it's plastic or metal. It just feels really synthetic, so I'm guessing it's like a modern synthetic lacing. So I would not attribute that to being original. But super practical, really pretty still in the shaping. It's got the nice scalloped tops, which I found to be interesting. Like, you know, aesthetic isn't necessarily bad for you, just, but yeah, these are quite practical, and very good, like reinforcing ankle strength, all that sort of stuff. So, she's not fully asleep, but she's making little snorty noises as she's trying to get comfortable. So, like, fine, whatever. So, somebody's also moving trash cans around in the neighborhood, so I don't know how much that carries over. But yeah, not the most like visually exciting boots, but like, man, these, you just feel like these would hold up for ages. Like, you get these and you're good to go forever. So that one's fun. So, trying to think of what other ones, because I've showed most of my shoes previously in like videos, but I'm just trying to think if there's anything more interesting I want to talk about with them. Not really sure if there is. I'm just gonna grab the one nearest to me that I haven't shown in this video. Pretty, sparkly, ooh, ah. So, another example, super low in that transitional 80s to 90s style where we're still round toe, but very low heel. I just really love all the steel, cut steel beadwork on this pair, which is lovely because it's like super practical black leather. Pretty shiny beads. So, you never know. The Russian boots that I reproed, oh, yeah, I still love those. I need to put little metal caps on the toes of mine just for heavier wear and tear. Because, you know, just like this pair, they actually had to put a little nail in it to hold them in place because they were having the same issues that I was having where it was starting to pull back. So this is the original pair that I've got. Might zoom out slightly. That way I can show you a little bit better all over some bigger things. That would make sense. That thing that I have is a lens that can go back and forth. So yeah, I love the fact that how much these were worn, and mine are starting to look exactly the same. So, I just have a really good camera. But yeah, these are fun. I like these ones a lot. Obviously by the fact that I reprod them and then wear them constantly, all the time. They're so comfortable and practical, and I never have regretted wearing two-tone color shoes. I mean, trying to think if there are any really early examples I can think of, but like they get super trendy in the 1790s. Like, if I was about to time travel for a long time, I probably would have had mostly 18th century clothing, late 18th century. I could definitely do that easily. I can do that as well now. Most of that stuff doesn't fit me anymore. But I think I need to do, like, I could probably do, obviously I could do 1920s, no problem, 19 teens, but yeah. Have I ever received antique shoes as, like, birthday gifts? I don't think I have. I don't think anyone's gifted me any of this stuff. Like, I've definitely had people send me things, like, I found this at an antique store or whatever, like, do you want them? But that's been about it. I know of, so, yeah. That original pair. It's crackling there, which I find really interesting, because it can only, like, it's so hard with leathers underneath, so. Favorite pair of shoes that I've made? I really like this pair. This is the pair that I wear all the time, the repo that I made of that. But I also really love the 1780, like 17, I guess it's more like 1778 embroidered pair that I made. That pair's pretty special to me. I haven't worn them terribly much, but yeah. Okay, I could definitely make some. Well, I mean, that'd be the thing. If I accidentally got thrown back in time, I'd be like, all right, well, I gotta find a place where I can go sew for my job. The problem is I just have to lie a lot about being what type of apprentice I was. So, neat. Yeah, reproductions do teach you so much about things. Sorry, there's a really weird noise outside. I don't know what it is. Hi. Oh my goodness, let me just reach across to you for a minute. I have a couple others. Oh, actually, I could do that. Really good example of similar but not the same. So, I love these two pairs because they're a great example of how it's really actually kind of hard to tell when shoes are from. So these two shoes, as you can see, have a very similar shape, very similar toe shape. This one is straight last, but again, this is a probably European, random, weird, late example of straight last, but very similar toe shape. Not hugely dissimilar heel shape, like definitely a little bit different. This one's got like a weird ridge to it, you might be able to see there, so it's kind of strange, but they're the same leather, same accent color to the leather, but this pair is from the early 70s, or early 1870s, and this pair is from the 19 teens. Like, just really, really weird differences there. So, yeah. How old do vintage shoes need to be before you can't wear them anymore? I feel like the thing is that it's less like there's a definite date that I think keeps moving, and more the fact that once we hit like 1930s and things like that, the way that shoes start being made fits differently and is structured differently, and so they can hold up to more actual everyday wear than, say, something from like the 1860s. It's just less a matter of how far away it is, and more a matter of just the type of construction and all of that. So, when are shoes considered vintage? There are technical terms for vintage versus antique and stuff like that. So vintage can qualify like 1990s and stuff like that now. And technically antiques, I don't remember exactly how many years back for me. And for me, vintage will always kind of, the crossover is that 1920s period where it kind of goes from being antique to vintage. That's for me. That's my preference. But again, that's kind of that like when shoe construction started to change and so many other things shifted. So it's not just a matter of years, it's a matter of style and construction methods and manufacturing methods that changed dramatically in that era. So it's like a definite date and time where things changed. No different than there's a huge change of how things were done like 1970s into the 80s. Da 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 da. So a Dia-session, the 1890s wedding dress, maybe, but Abby has a really pretty 1880s one she bought because she knows who it goes to and that sort of thing, and so she'll probably try to keep it together with its garments from the same person. So, but yeah, 1990s, go for it, whatever. I'm considered vintage, yeah. But yeah, like most people wouldn't find these to be comfortable, either pair. This probably has like a metal shank in it. This one's super soft. Another great example of the differences between the two. Because it's not the fact that it's like, the fact that it's got very few very large eyelets is indicative of it being a little bit later in style, but yeah, so similar but so different, which is one of the reasons I really love this particular pair of shoes, because it's so uncomfortably weird. Because like square toes weren't really a big popular thing in that era, but it was like a weird trend, just random. So yeah. Oh, this also has the label inside. Let's see if I can get that to focus. There we go. Probably won't be able to read it just because it's shiny and in fancy cursive, but it's Laird, Schrober, and Mitchell. It's not Philadelphia, it's Philada. It is Philadelphia, but for some reason it's Philada. That's shortened version. It's so weird. Like, why did we? There's not. It's not. I don't know. I don't know. It's so strange. But I do want to eventually get a stamp made to do something akin to that. I guess this is a good example because you can also see the wear and tear on this one and how it's kind of got like a bit of a pinkish hue to it, because this is a, what you can tell from this one maybe is a little more, it's a plum and copper, so it's the way that this is finished, it's a bit purplish, but it's got kind of like a copper sheen to it. It's kind of hard to see on the camera, but it's like a metallic dark purple copper sort of thing, so that may have been what the other one was as well, who knows. And this is not like an uncommon thing for shoes starting like mid-19th century. So obviously those have that. This early 1890s pair has that same shiny metallic. This 19-teens pair also, though it feels a little bit more, I don't want to say fake or synthetic, it's just, it's almost like a painted on version instead. It just doesn't look right comparison. Like it doesn't look as nice. Something about it feels a little more synthetic, a little more shiny than it should be, I think. So, my favorite pair of shoes that I've seen in a movie or TV show, they don't, like, I don't know. I don't feel like they do shoes right in those. They usually just kind of vaguely, like, even when they're centralized, they're like modernized in a weird way. It frustrates me. So yeah, I love the, it looks like a buckle, but it's really just beads. Like it's not a metal buckle, it's just beads. And then underneath, you can see here is the actual strap that goes across the shoe. Sometimes these were like elasticated on, this one's not. It's just an extension, like the seam runs right there. And so the quarters have the little button strap on it, and then the flap is really heavily structured. I'm pretty sure there might even be something metal inside that holds it up. Like it is, something's in there that is very stiff punk to it. And this, I also really like this pair because it's definitely not dainty by like size in terms of width. It's not particularly long. It's a, what size is it? We've got, I have a 5, a 3, and a 6 on you. That's not really helpful. Why are we 3 numbers? Great, guys. That's helpful. It definitely feels in like a 7 range, if not slightly larger. I think the reason why it feels so synthetic is you can actually see around the edges here, the spillover. I think it's been like spray painted or something. Which does make me wonder if that is a thing that was done in a modern, or if that was historically what was done. There's definitely a finish added afterwards, or someone did something to it to polish it and finish it and went well over the edges in doing so. But like there's a little bit of the shine kind of showing over the edges there too. So I don't know. It's very strange. But so this is a pretty cheap shoe from what I can tell. It does have, I do have the box for this. It is a French shoe. So I can't do much research into the brand, but it's Aurore. Like Aurora, but just Aurore. So it's harder for me to do research into these styles when they're from France. Just because I don't have access to all of those documents in the same way. But yeah, it's Aurore, La Grande Marque Française. So it's a company that I've seen advertisements for, and things like that. But yeah, it may just be a really weird shoe polish. Or it may have had, yeah, I may have lived in a theater for a while. Who knows? They do weird things to shoes. If you didn't know. But yeah. So yeah, and that's the thing. Like that's the era where we sort of developed this like faux buckle 18th century pilgrim sort of thing, where it's like, no, they didn't wear shoes like that, but we're gonna pretend that they did. It's really fun. This pair I particularly love because of the lining. I know I've shown it before, but the lining of this was originally like a robin's egg blue tone. It's faded and turned brown in certain areas where it got more wear and tear, but originally it was a pretty bright blue for a black shoe, which is really cool. Not that that would have shown in any way except to the wearer, which is, I think, all the more fun. But the cutout styles, do you really like that of the... This is a good example of the late transition where it's a pretty broad rounded toe, but it definitely doesn't feel square anymore. Like that doesn't feel square, but it definitely isn't a narrow round. It's a pretty wide. So like we've moved into that transition from late 70s to early 80s. Like this is probably like 82, 84. This is also not only tons of wear, but has been repaired. So they wore it down so much you can actually see where they wore completely through the sole right there on this one. So there is no sole leather there anymore. They wore it so much. And they essentially had to, these stitches were completely worn out. And so they had to put new stitches in order to keep the sole from literally falling off. So they're big, clunky, angry stitches. Because they wore through what was probably a turn shoe construction, and like that flap completely wore off and exposed everything, and so they had to go back in and restitch some of the things because the flap wore off where it was keeping things safe. So like these shoes got worn so much. Which is really like extra cute. Like I said, it's just are any of the dyes toxic in my shoes? I honestly don't know. Probably not. I will, once I'm done, very well wash my hands. And that's also why I'm like, I tend to operate in this sort of manner where it's like, I will assume that I would not want to lick my hands after all of this. I'm touching used shoes anyway. Like some of them do shed, and like crackle and break. And I will get a fair amount of dust off of some of them. You probably can't see the difference of how I'm handling certain pairs versus others. This pair is pretty good condition for as beat up as it is. It doesn't come off of my hands like some of the other ones do. So some of them I was very gently moving them around. And I also, like, I can start to tell, it's hard for me to tell because I've been talking this whole time, but generally if I handle the shoes a bunch in a smaller space or enclosed space, then I will start to feel like that in my lungs to some extent. But it's mostly just dust that's an issue more so than toxic dyes. I'm not licking things. The amount of exposure for the toxic dyes that you need usually is long-term and repeated. and a lot of them will leave your system as soon as you're not exposed to them anymore. So unless it is an extreme case of inhalation, it would take me basically just handling these days after days after days after days after days. And then usually taking it directly into my body. So either aeration or none of these are going to have anything that can be absorbed through my skin fast enough in large enough quantities. Like, I will wash my hands. I'm not going to go eat after this without really thoroughly washing my hands, but I'm not worried about any of these causing problems. The only thing I have in my collection that I have concern over is my 1850s jacket, which is the proper term, both proper colors for potentially the two different types of arsenic green, Paris and Shields, and I keep that in its own separate box, and I don't handle it unless I absolutely have to. It lives alone. So, and again, same sort of thing, then I just won't lick my hands. But with arsenic, it is a very short term in the body, so you either have to ingest a ton of it really fast or a pretty decent amount consistently. So, yep. No, the difference is just it's leather versus plastic. There's multiple different types of leather here. You're going to see a lot of goat, a lot of cow, different range in ages. I know kangaroo is actually used earlier than I thought it was, but it's not very common as much. It's mostly goat, cow. Pig is more of a modern thing. I'm trying to think if there's anything weird that I would think is different. I think it's those two, which it's just, they're food, so they're really easy to raise for food, and then that's a byproduct. Like, that's one of the reasons why it's so popular. It's like the byproduct of that animal, once it becomes everything else, is useful. Like, you want to make use of all of that. So, yeah, unless I get the stuff, like, wet and hot at the same time, I'm not too worried. That's just painted walls. I wish it was wallpaper. I can't wallpaper here. Yeah, don't lick the antiques. That is the first rule. Oddest animal leather that I've seen? I mean, they've made shoes out of some weird things over the years. It tends to just be the term, which I don't know if there's a new term for it, tends to be exotic leathers. But things like stingray or snake or other stuff like that. The thing is with shoes, you can't make them out of too many different things because they need to be able to stretch and bend and flex and go back. And a lot of leathers, if you stretch them, don't return. They don't have the bounce back. So not everything makes a good shoe. That's the same reason why there's problems with vegan leathers. I don't even like using that term. With synthetic leathers. I'm just going to say it that way. Problems with synthetic leathers is the fact that they just don't, stretch in the same way. Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't touch lead, you shouldn't touch mercury, you shouldn't touch arsenic, but in order to actually have, problems from it, you have to do a lot of it. I mean, I've definitely touched mercury before as a kid. It's fine. I grew up fine. I didn't touch a lot of it, so it's okay. So yeah, synthetic leathers. The reason why I keep looking, I keep trying to find, so I don't use synthetic leathers because, one, the vast majority of them are just plastic. They might have some organic material mixed in there, but they are by and large plastic. They have PLU in them. Apple leather has PLU in it. Pretty much everything is just plastic, and I don't have the equipment to work with it, and it will never die. It will wear out, and I won't be able to wear it very quickly because it will get scuffed, and I can't do anything to maintain it, but it will not disintegrate once I throw it away. There are newer types that are coming out that have less and less or even no plastic in them. The vast majority of those, things like cork leather, which is really cool. I have purses made out of that. It needs to be not stretching. It needs to be solid in its structure. Like, it can flex a little bit, but it can't hold up to this amount of flex and movement. So it just can't. And even then, I'd still have to go with either a leather or a rubber sole, because that's just what there is. Period. There are not other options for soles that will hold up. It's plastic, rubber, leather. That's what you get. So I keep looking, I order samples of things. It's really hard to get a hold of if you are not a full-size corporation building the scales of things, like as a shoe manufacturer or something like that. I cannot easily get a hold of almost any of the things that are touted as vegan leather. It is almost impossible for me to get a hold of anything in the, like, a single piece that I would need for shoes. It just doesn't, period. Like, it's so hard to, like, it just doesn't exist for me right now. So I'd like to test things out. I can't get a hold of it. It's not like even a cost thing. I just can't get it, period. So, yep. So that's why I don't use it, because I can't find it, and the ones that I can find are not good for shoes. And I also don't want to make a whole bunch of shoes that are plastic and would do way more damage to the environment than leather would, because leather's a byproduct. It's already there. Vintage and modern day shoes in terms of how they're made. Flexibility. Lightweight. Like, this is an 1880s pair. We're moving into heels, but this is, like, it's like a ballet slipper. Like an actual ballet slipper, not like a modern, like, oh, look, I'm wearing a ballet. No, like an actual ballet slipper. It is that lightweight and so that's why they look so small. They're tight to your foot because they flex. Modern shoes are a giant structure that has to fit around. So we're not, wrapping our feet, we're building a house around them. So yeah, it's gonna require bigger shoes. Makes a big difference in all of those aspects. So I'm just gonna grab another shoe and just hold it in my hands while we talk. So I'm not just in my face. Oh yeah, there's tons of poisonous things everywhere. So yeah, plastic is also not breathable. Very true. It's not good for your feet. I did a whole thing on hat making and mercury about a year ago. So the Gonzo hat, highly recommend that. Basically the issue was more for the people making it. For the people wearing it, it was only an issue if it was like generally up against their skin. Or they wore a hat all the time, and then it was usually more an issue of things like feathers that would like drop things or stuff like that. So, yep. Yeah, I would not trust dust. If any of my shoes put off a ton of dust, or if I'm doing stuff like when I get the one and pull all of the, I just realized there's something in this. I need to look, give me a second. When I'm pulling the wool out of the one, I'm gonna wear a mask for that. So, everybody used to be tiny. Not true. Arch support is wonderful just because, like I was saying, it's narrow, and so therefore this softness is supporting, like, it's pulling up and around, so it's going to fit you rather than having to build out. Yeah, the World War II shoes made from fish leather. No, I haven't come across those. I've read about them, but I haven't handled them. So, yeah, Mad as a Hatter is a really complicated thing. Like I said, the video explains it way better than I can in a few minutes, because I have to go through the entire process. What I was just noticing in this is that there's a little stamp in there, little sticker, if I can get it to focus. Come on. Maybe? No. There we go. I was like, I just need to find center. Yeah, it is. I feel like I looked at this at one point, but I didn't get around to looking it up. I can read something association, August 14th, 1800 something stamp. I don't think the other one had this, because when I looked at it, I mean, it's got a number 1 in it, which I would assume that they're qualifying this as a size 1, which is a children's size. Which is what I would figure. There's KA something something EW Mod Association. Does that say 1800? Yeah, no. Let's say 1860. Nah. The numbers are so tiny on this, it's really hard to read. I don't know if I can get it to really... See, there you go. That little stamp, you can kind of see it says like August 18 something on it. Yeah, we attributed Mad as a Hatter to that, even though it's not how that was actually a problem. It's like if I stare at it long enough, it goes back. It's like a freaking magic eye thing. I think it's... 1860 would make more sense, but it might be saying like the establishment of the association was in 1800. But I think that's a patent thing. I think maybe a patent number. I need to look that up. Why have I not looked that up before? Maybe the other shoe didn't have it and I always grabbed the other shoe. So I need to, yeah, I need to go look at the other shoe and see if it's got the stamp in it too. But also fun. You can see these little nails back there, the square-headed, which is really cool. So, yeah. Yeah, I will, as soon as things render, it will automatically upload the entire video. So don't worry about that sort of stuff. Yeah. Oh yeah, you can totally make like side lacing boots. The difficulty is the fact that you really need a last for that. But you can get flat lasts, flat modern lasts. It won't necessarily be just the right shape, but you know. So we'll see. Like I want to like see if I can find some good flat lasts that are available, but yeah, always check both shoes. That's definitely the case. But yeah, I really like this one. It's got an interesting shape to the bottom. Like I said, it's a children's shoe. It's a good example of yet another children's Oxford. I keep finding all these children's Oxfords. It's really easy. So, easiest style of shoe to make anything that doesn't involve a heel. So, yeah, I mean, I'll put it this way. Out of all the shoes that I have available to my hands right now, the easiest one to make would be this one. It's flat. You can glue it together. I mean, I did a video that was like how to do this sort of style, but like with modern construction methods. But you're not going to deal with fit being a problem as much or whatever it is. So, yep. But I love all the little nail marks on the bottom of that, you can see. But yeah, this sort of style, because this is not unlike a modern ballet flat, as they're called, and you can definitely find shoemaking instructions on how to do modern versions of this. And then you can just kind of like work, yeah, or you can go even further back and do one of the like Roman shoes or those sorts of things where they're just wrapped around and laced rather than like stitched. So, yep. Yeah. This is 1820s. Probably early 1820s, so this is just a really standard women's shoe from that era. More mid, looking at the bottom of it. Looks a little more tapered. And so yeah, this is just really standard, you know, post-Regency, simple style. Universal shoe sizes. Yeah, I think it'll take a while. Just because I think every country is so determined that they have a better system than others, which I can say I hate the European system for sizing. So if they could change and actually start producing more size, because there's too much space between the sizes. There's too much space. Honestly, the shoe sizing that I am most agreeable to is the UK, because they don't differentiate between men's and women's. They're the same, and it should be. And they have what I feel like is a good interval range of sizes. It's exactly the same as the US. We just, for some reason, adjust women's by 2. It's stupid. So US and UK men's sizes the same. US and UK women's sizes off by 2. I hate it. So like I'm a US size 7. I would be a UK size 5. But I'm somewhere between a 37 and a 38 in the EU, and I hate it. I hate it. The reason why we don't do shoe size equals length of foot is not only because of width-based things, but because depending on your toe shape, you'll have a different length. So you could put in what length the foot should be, but some people have different shapes of toes, and so you can buy different lengths depending on your shape. Like I have a really narrow toe range, and it actually kind of tapers naturally, so I can do different styles differently. So it's like, but it would be not a bad thing. It's just like, that's the only reason why it you know. But I just think it needs to be consistent, and I don't think it should be gendered, and I feel like the range needs to be either with the current like size, half size system, or that sort of thing. Like the current sizing system, each half size is a difference of about, I'm not even sure I can like visualize this, of about a third of an inch. Actually, no, it would be a sixth of an inch. So about yay much of a difference between half sizes. Like, I figured I was like, that much of a tiny difference. But that makes it, that's needed for your foot. Which is also why I find it funny when people are like, people had smaller feet or people were shorter back then. It's like, even if we're looking at averages, we're talking about like people were shorter by a couple inches, which is really not that big of a difference. And that's regional and very more 19th century issue than like 18th century and back. Until we get back far enough that it becomes an issue again. Like, 18th century wasn't that dramatically different in our heights for most places. And for like shoe sizes, like, we're talking that much of a difference on average, like half an inch, a little over a centimeter. Like, it's not, it just, they look smaller than they are. And that's one of the things I always find funny. People are like, smaller back then. It's like, by the tiniest amount. Like, sure, but, and I get that all the time, like, on my, feet weren't actually that much smaller back then video. People are like, but people were smaller. I'm like, were they? Really? Not by much. Couple inches. That's it. Yeah, we didn't used to gender shoe sizes. Historical shoe size charts, like, said this is the range that is typical for women's, and it overlaps what's typical for men's. But we didn't differentiate in the same way that we do now. So it's silly. The US version is just plain silly. So yeah. Easiest men's shoe to make. Usually when I start people on men's shoes, historical men's shoes, I'll start them essentially on slippers like this. That's also a good place to start for women's shoes as well, if you have no idea and, you don't know about fitting or things like that. But that, honestly, same sort of thing. And men's shoes, there's a lot more information out there. But you can also do dancing, lightweight dancing slippers, things like that. So, yeah, I don't know. There's not like, it just depends. The thing that makes shoemaking difficult is the fact that there are so many tools and supplies that you need. That's the huge part of the problem. It's not just how difficult is it to do, it's how difficult is it to fit, how difficult is it to find the supplies, and how expensive are they. That's the bigger problem. So anything that requires less supply is going to be the easiest and is easier to fit. That's really what it comes down to. So if you're wanting to do all sorts of fancy finishing and broguing and things, that's going to be way more difficult because you have to buy a whole bunch of extra stuff for that versus like just plain, really plain shoes. So yeah, because like you can see how this would support, like it's super narrow. You're going to support your arch because it pulls up and around versus like wide and flat. Your foot, even when you're more flat-footed, isn't that wide and flat like it. So that, yeah. These are Cirrhosis, which is a really popular brand around the 1900s. So there's like all the beads on these, and this is like the most typical. Like this is as quintessentially like 1905 as you can get, like, which I love. There's tons of ads for this company and tons of ads for shoes exactly like this, with all their little straps and everything. So, okay, I should wrap things up because I've apparently been doing this for 2.5 hours. I was only planning on 2. So if you guys have any other questions, let me know and I'll wrap up on those. But otherwise, I will wrap things up and I need to go feed the dog and eat. Places that sell historical recreation shoes, yeah, there are plenty of brands, like tons of them. You can find a bunch on Etsy. You can find them all over Europe and America. Just depends on what era you're looking for. I'd just pick an era and start looking for vaguely around that. But yeah, there are a lot of those. Oh yeah, yeah, there are definitely a much wider range of shoes for people with foot problems or other disabilities or anything in that range. There are tons of examples of shoes with accommodations specific to the person and their health needs. One of my favorites is a receipt for a pair of shoes from the 1820s down in a museum in Tennessee that was a plantation, and they were purchasing shoes for one of their enslaved people. Like I think they said she worked in the house usually, but she had foot problems, and so she needed extra layers in order to keep her feet warm and dry, and so they requested like 2 extra insoles, stuff like that, and what it was made out of. There's all this description. I reproduced the shoes for the museum like a long time ago. So yeah. Have I ever made shoes or clothing for my husband? I've made clothing for him, which I no longer own. It's been a long time. I sold that suit a long time ago. But no, I've made shoes for lots of friends and things over the years, but not so much. So New Year's plans and goals, that's a big one. I'll talk about that more in coming videos, I'm sure. Anything I'm planning on doing, which is I think at this point large scale. But I don't know of any shoe places in Reno. I moved to Reno right before the lockdown, so I barely know anything here. One of my biggest tips for shoe ease is you can get buckles that are the quick rig buckles that we use for theater. So if you ever have like a buckled strap or something, you can replace it with those, and they're so easy. They're perfect for burlesque and theater and things because it's just like a hook over a faux buckle thing. Those I love. I know there's tons of other things too, but like that's one of my favorite like features of things. Hi. No. Oh, okay. You wanna? Okay. Okay. Move. You want back down again? All right. Bailey said it's time to be done. Thanks. Hanging out, guys. Like I said, this will be up for those. If you have questions and you're watching this at a later time, feel free to put comments down below. It's the easiest way for me to see those. I will try and somewhat keep up with them as best I can. I don't see all comments all the time just because sometimes I'm busy, but I will try and respond at least for the first few days. And yeah, I'll talk more about plans for the next year in coming videos. Not the next couple, but maybe after that. So decorating modern shoes that look historical, ribbon trim or beads, or honestly a lot of times changing out the laces if they're laced up or things like that, so that can make a big difference. So it was great talking to you guys. Bailey is starting to get into trouble. What are you're gonna get trapped? Yeah. All right, Bailey says lunchtime, so I will see you guys again soon. Bye.